Well, hello. It's Scotland at 7, or slightly after 7 tonight, I'm afraid. So this is Hugh Stewart here in the Broadcasting Scotland studio on Wednesday the 23rd of February. So simultaneously we're doing another programme, which I'll tell you about later, in another part of Glasgow. And also down in her London office, we're joined tonight by Kirsty Blackman, Member of Parliament for Aberdeen North. Good evening, Kirsty. Can you hear me and see me okay?
Good evening. I can hear you great, Hugh.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Assuming that you can see me too.
That's fine. That's fine. So yeah, sorry about the slight delay, guys, but let's get on with it now. So our top story tonight, Kirsty, is the latest developments in Ukraine, and in his latest response to the Russian invasion of its eastern territories, Ukraine's President Zelensky has today requested Parliament to declare a state of emergency. This would authorise the government to restrict movement and to bring in curfews if these are needed. In the meantime, all Ukrainian citizens in Russia have been advised to leave immediately, and that's apparently some 3 million people. Ukraine's Security Council has also conscripted a reported 36,000 military reservists and also has an additional resource of almost 500,000 experienced veterans available. This state of emergency would cover all regions, that's all the oblasts of Ukraine, with the exception of Donetsk and Luhansk, which are under Russian control. Now, this afternoon, the EU ministers were agreeing tough sanctions against Russian banks and certain named individuals. Top of the list is Sergei Shoigu, the Russian defense minister. Also targeted are leading figures in the military and all the members of the Duma, the parliament, who voted on Monday to recognise the two breakaway regions. The EU is also focusing on Russian media, with sanctions on Maria Zakharova, who is a spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry, and Margarita Simoyan, who is the head of RT, Russia Today. Describing these as propagandists, the EU also took action against Yevgeny Prigozhin, whose St. Petersburg-based department, often called the Troll Factory, employs bloggers to generate anti-Western messages which it spreads on social media. The persons named will face travel bans and asset freezes. Together with restrictions of trade with the two disputed territories and bans on raising money in foreign markets, the EU measures go further than those already announced by the US and are much tougher than any so far brought in by the UK government. Speaking today in Prime Minister's Questions in Westminster, I believe, Kirsty, you can confirm that in a minute, Ian Blackford, representing the SNP, raised the question of Russian money in the UK economy, asking if we were going to wait until Russia attacked before getting rid of the dirty money from London. Mr. Blackford also raised the question of SLPs, that's Scottish Limited Partnerships. These are companies registered in Scotland but overseen by London, which have been used to channel £20.8 million. The UK government has not addressed this problem, although Prime Minister Johnson, in replying, claimed no country has done more to tackle the dirty money problem. So, Kirsty Blackman, I think we might as well start with that aspect of it, since it's at the bottom of our story there. So, if Johnson says we've done more than anybody else to tackle dirty money, is that because we've got more dirty money than anybody else?
And I'm not convinced that they have done very much to tackle it, to be honest. So the issue with Scottish Limited Partnerships is that they're not actually Scottish. It's just a kind of the way that they are named. They're called Scottish Limited Partnerships. And Alison Thulis has been raising this for, I think, about 3 or 4 years now, possibly 4 years, about the issue of Scottish Limited Partnerships. So Ian Blackford raised it today as well in Prime Minister's Questions, and he previously raised the issue of SLPs with Prime Minister. And you're right, they are just a way to funnel money, basically. They're incredibly dodgy. We can't shut them down because the Scottish Government doesn't have the powers to do that. We need Westminster to take action, and Westminster just hasn't stepped up despite knowing how much of an issue they are. More widely, one of the issues that Ian Blackford raised today was the issue of Russian money going into the Conservative Party. And you can understand that the Conservative Party might not be quite so keen on tackling dirty money if they've had £2.3 million of Russian money. But I mean, the whole situation is grim, and the UK has failed really miserably to deal with it. The restrictions that were announced by the UK on 3 individuals, so there was 3 sanctioned individuals, are people that have been on the US list of those sanctioned since 2018. So, we're nowhere near where the EU are in terms of taking, creating sanctions on new people today. We are still sanctioning people that have been sanctioned for the past 4 years by the US.
So the embarrassing thing about SLPs is Scottish Limited Partnership. Yes, we are associated with them, but it's actually nothing to do with the Scottish Government at all. Now, in reply today, Prime Minister Johnson and the Conservative Party have been saying all the money received is legit. It's all from people who are registered in Britain. Is that an answer to the question?
Well, I mean, it has to be from people who are registered in Britain, or they're not allowed to accept it as a political entity. You have to check where it's come from. But just because somebody is registered to vote in Britain doesn't mean it's clean money. Doesn't mean it's not money that's come from Russia. And that's part of the issue that we've been raising, is the fact that the UK has taken so long to act, and the actions that it's taken have not been comprehensive enough. And they've given time for this money to be moved around. They've given time for it to be put into places so it looks clean. But we need it to actually. There needs to be pain for these folk, and I don't mean physical pain. I mean in terms of reducing the amount of ability that they've got to move money around, to buy property, to do all of those things that you're allowed to do as a free citizen. Why should we allow those Russians that are associated with the regime, that are using their money for nefarious purposes, to keep using their money for that? So the things we've been calling for is that the UK government have got to suspend Russia from SWIFT. So SWIFT is the payment system to make international payments. We want visa bans enacted, we want asset freezes, and we want action against Russian disinformation networks that are operating in the UK. I'm pleased that EU are taking action, but the UK has failed to do so in any comprehensive way.
Yes, I made up this report earlier on this afternoon, and I've just checked. It was within the last hour, actually. The EU had the foreign ministers meeting as the European Council have now agreed to that package of measures, so that's definitely going through. Now let's go back to the first aspect of that story, Kirsty, which is the state of emergency in Ukraine. Does this look to you like a country which is strong, which is determined, which is not going to be a pushover should Putin decide to go any further to the west?
I mean, we're very keen to stand in full solidarity with the people of Ukraine, but they're going to need support. And the UK should be providing that humanitarian support. The UK should be providing the economic support that Ukraine needs and that Ukrainian citizens need in order to keep themselves safe. I mean, the Russians are talking about this being some kind of peacekeeping mission, and it's absolutely not. The US has said that Russian forces are creating lists of identified Ukrainians to be killed or sent to camps. I mean, faced with that, you can imagine that people are feeling pretty rough in Ukraine just now, pretty scared, and it's incumbent upon the international community to step up and say, we support you, we stand in solidarity with you, and we think what Russia is doing is completely and totally wrong.
Yeah, Russia has, in fact, been twisting things, haven't they? They've been saying that the reason we need to send our peacekeepers in is because there are people being killed, there's all this bombardment. But of course, it's Russian supporting irregulars who are doing the bombarding, isn't it? And they also seem to be successfully persuading the Russian people that their Russian brothers and sisters there are being victimized, aren't they? They're saying, we're going to get these people out, we're going to evacuate them because they're subject of ethnic cleansing to Ukraine. Now, this is nonsense, isn't it? But is that why you think we should be targeting the social media campaigns and the disinformation?
I think we need to be really strong about disinformation. I think we need to make sure that that information that is coming out of Russia that says that they're, and somehow it's a rescue mission. We need to be tackling that. We need to be making clear that it is not, that Ukraine is a country that we stand side by side with, and that what Russia is doing, the aggressive action that Russia has taken, and it is absolutely aggressive action, is completely unacceptable. And people are going to die as a result of these troops being there. It is just the case, and that's totally unacceptable. And just to mention about the Russian people as well as the Ukrainian people, in both countries we're going to have people that are in favour of the action that the Russian government has taken, or very against the action that the Russian government has taken. So we can't necessarily say that everybody in Russia feels very strongly that they support Putin. It's, not going to be the case. So we need to make sure that what we are doing is an attempt to try and sanction and take action against people that really do have lots of money, people that have got power, people that are going to be able to say to Putin, look, this is really hurting us. Please, could you step back from this action?
Do you think there's any way that a peaceful, well, can you see the contours of a peaceful resolution? We don't know, of course, whether Putin intends to go any further. He's taken the territories which have been in dispute, really. They've been in play for the last 5 years. And there's no evidence, although President Biden says they are going to invade and take over Kiev, but we don't know if he is or not. But do you think there's any way that Putin could stop where he is just now and then sell that to the Russian people as a victory and then go back home as a hero?
I mean, he certainly could, but the problem that we've got is that we have got a world that is built on having peace and world order, having mutual respect of democracy, recognizing states and upholding territorial integrity and sovereignty. And it works because people respect that. When you have somebody like Putin who is clearly just willing to steamroll it, willing to act out with the boundaries of what the rest of us see as how you should act in a sort of civilized society, then it's very difficult to actually say what action he might take next, because it's not predictable. It's predictable that things have got worse and worse, but it's not predictable what direction he'll necessarily go next, because the direction he's taken doesn't seem rational or sensible to many of us.
Yeah, I don't know if there's still any residual support in Scotland. I bet there probably is, really, for the old days of the Soviet Empire and its apparent socialism. But do you think there's any aspects of Scottish society where people used to think, well, in some way Russia has got it right, in some way Russia is better than the West? I mean, there used to be a huge amount of communist support in Scotland. I'm talking about when I was young. I mean, there used to be thousands of Communist Party members in this city of Glasgow. But do you think there's any residual support for the Russian regime here?
I mean, Scotland is clearly more left-wing than England, and always has been, and more, willing to support communitarian-type regimes. And, absolutely, communism in the past would have had quite a lot of people supporting that. I think that we are still, much further left than England. I think that is the case. But I think that the majority of people in Scotland looking at this will see the attacks on the Ukrainian people, the attacks on Ukrainian sovereignty, and feel incredibly strongly about that, and much more strongly about that than they might feel about harking back to some society that no longer exists in Russia, just because they used to be a society that was further left and communist doesn't mean they currently are. So I think people in Scotland have got a pretty good grip on reality when it comes to that.
Yeah, when you talk about being slightly left to centre, which I guess we are, I mean, there's nothing left about the Russian regime. The money, the dirty money we've been talking about, of course, belongs to a tiny class of oligarchs in Russia. So I looked up the other day, among the advanced countries in Europe, Russia has just about got the worst maldistribution of income. They've got the greatest inequality in Russia. So if anyone thinks that's socialism, they really ought to look at numbers like that, don't you think so?
Absolutely, and the UK has got no brilliant place to stand on, given how deeply unequal our society is, and given how deeply unequal because of the skewedness, because of the consistent Tory governments that we have. So we're not necessarily in a significantly better position than they are at the moment. But you're right, it is absolutely not a left-wing society. It's hugely unequal. And that is why they've managed to have this situation where there is so much of that dirty money swirling around, and such significant chunks of that money are no longer in Russia. They're in places like the UK.
Yeah, indeed. So yeah, people need to think again when they look at the present Russian regime. So I'm going to move on. Obviously, we'll discuss Ukraine again as things develop there. The second story tonight, Kirsty, concerns your colleague Alison Thulis. Now, I'm going to introduce this by with a warning for initials and acronyms. We're going to talk about the APPG and the NTIA, right? So the first of these is an all-party parliamentary group. I think I've got that right, which means
Yes.
ad hoc groups of MPs. Maybe you're on one yourself. And the other group is the Nighttime Industries Association, so that's an acronym warning. So the story, today Central Glasgow MP Alison Thewlis rejected an approach from a lobby group who told her it plans to set up an all-parliamentary, one of the APPBs, an all-party parliamentary group for the nighttime economy, which was to be sponsored by an alcohol firm, or several of them. Ms Thewlis said it was unusual to be propositioned by lobbyists rather than an MP, even if there may have been merit in such a cross-party group. The MP was speaking after it was revealed last week that more than £13 million has been poured into the growing network of MPs' interest groups by private firms, fueling concern over the potential for backdoor influence. In emails to Alison Thewlis in 2019, a group called Connect Communications said sponsorship was needed to make the group viable. Connect Communications, which is co-owned and run by the former Labour MP Andy Sawford, currently runs 15 APPG secretariats. The secretariats of the APPGs, of which there are now 755, arrange meetings and trips for members and sometimes cultivate potential funders. A spokesperson for a company said in 2019 there was an initiative from parliamentarians and outside organisations to form an APPG on the nighttime economy, and Connect were involved in these discussions. The Nighttime Economy APPG was subsequently established with the help of a different lobbying firm, Tendo Consulting, and the group received more than £7,500 worth of benefits in kind from the Nighttime Industries Association, which is the NTIA, which acts as the group's secretariat last year. The NTIA says on its website that it lobbies nationally on behalf of pubs and clubs whom it represents across the UK. That APPG last year published a 46-page report on the impact of COVID on the industry, calling on the government to extend tax breaks for the sector. Although described as an APPG inquiry, the report was researched by Tendo Consulting and funded by the NTIA. Alison Thewlis, who chairs 3 APPGs herself, said she believed there's a pressing need for greater transparency more broadly about the funding of the APPGs and the role of commercial interests. Right, so Kirsty, I'm not going to say APPG again. I think that's enough for tonight. Let's just talk about groups. So first of all, are you yourself on any of these, the all-party groups?
Yeah, I'm on quite a few of them, and it's not unusual. You know, as you said, there's 750 of them. There's a significant number of them. If you go through the list of APPGs, there's a whole load of different ones for different countries, as well as, you know, special interest ones. So there's ones like the Nighttime Economy. There's a LGBT one. There's ones on corporate governance. There's ones on the post offices. You know, it's as wide as you can possibly get. Basically everything you can imagine. There is an all-party parliamentary group about it. There are some rules about how all-party parliamentary groups work. So there is a requirement for them to publish accounts. There's a requirement for them to be transparent about their funding. There's a requirement for them to have an AGM and to register the members that take positions as a result of the AGM, and also register who the secretariat is. One of the concerns that's been raised recently is the fact that a number of the APPGs are not returning their accounts and not being transparent about the amount of money that they get. So I think that is a pretty big concern. We have to be realistic about the fact that absolutely some MPs are going to be supportive of, you know, changes to how the nighttime economy, and actually would be happy supporting any of these things. And it's not necessarily the case that these lobbying groups are giving money or, you know, stuff to the MPs. It's not necessarily the case. Some of them genuinely do a good job, but yeah, some of them are a bit shady, and the lack of transparency is genuinely an issue. It's very different in Scotland, where we've got rules about lobbying.
Yes, so the Scottish Parliament doesn't have this level of lobbying. But in general, there's no reason why people shouldn't set up an interest group. But maybe you think maybe it should be more tightly regulated. And the one I've just quoted there, it looks as if the whole thing's been orchestrated by outside, and the MPs on it are really just a figurehead, and somebody else is actually doing all the running. Is that what it looks like to you?
Yeah, it certainly sounds like that, and it seems quite bizarre to me. It's not something that I had really seen in many of the APPGs that I've had any involvement with. I'm not saying that it's not across, not pretty wide. I genuinely don't know. I know how the ones that I've been involved with have worked, and that's pretty unusual. Some of them don't produce reports, for example. So there's an all-party parliamentary group on offshore oil and gas, and as an Aberdeen MP, you would be unsurprised that I'm a member of that. Now, Oil and Gas UK, who are a conglomerate organisation, you absolutely do lobbying on behalf of the oil and gas industry, but we don't produce reports. We don't. The most that we would ever really do is to have a meeting generally in advance of the budget, and a Westminster Hall debate on oil and gas. So that's kind of the level, and to me that seems like a pretty sensible level. We're not getting money for it. It seems like it makes sense and keeps MPs informed. But the nighttime economy one, the way you're describing it, seems a bit strange.
Okay, yeah. So in general, lobbying, there's nothing wrong with lobbying, but it has to be done properly. It has to be transparent. We have to know who you've been speaking to. Okay, so let's move on to our third story tonight. It's about the recent loans which were given to businesses to get them through the COVID economic crisis over the last 2 years. Now, fraud and error are likely to have cost the UK government as much as £16 billion across the COVID-19 emergency loan schemes, according to Parliament's spending watchdog, which describes these losses as unacceptable. This report from a Public Accounts Committee published today says the Treasury should, by the end of the year, come up with estimates of fraud or error losses across the individual schemes and how much it intends to recover. The government guaranteed or gave out loans worth £129 billion to people and companies during the COVID pandemic to support them financially through the lockdown restrictions. However, ministers were warned from the start that the speed of the schemes would open them up to fraud. Since then, government agencies have found large-scale frauds across several parts of the system, ranging from the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, that's the CGRS for furloughed workers, the Bounce Back Loan Scheme, that's the BBLS for small companies, and the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, that's the CBILS for mid-sized businesses. The reports from the crime and bankruptcy agencies have shown some loans were used to fund gambling, luxuries and home improvements. Theodore Agnew dramatically quit his role as the Treasury Minister in a speech in the House of Lords last month after criticising the lack of action to recover the stolen money. Data from the government department's annual reports suggest that fraud and error losses are between £12.4 billion and £21 billion, with a central estimate of £15.7 billion, report said. The furlough scheme is estimated to have suffered the largest fraud and error losses, coming to £5.3 billion, followed by the bounce back scheme, where £4.9 billion is thought to have been lost. The government has funded the Taxpayer Protection Task Force to chase fraud in these schemes, including a furlough run by HM, Revenue and Customs. But anti-corruption experts are concerned that funding is inadequate to fight the fraud in the bounce back loans. The government will also have to write off £21 billion in loans to people or businesses who will be unable to pay them back. So presumably businesses that failed or people who haven't got the money, right? So I suppose one thing that the government will say is it was an emergency, as they did with dodgy PPE that they paid for. They'll say, we were in a hurry, we had to do it quickly, so we have to move fast. Do you think is there a political side to this, or is it just lack of oversight and lack of checking?
I mean, you weren't kidding about it being acronym heavy tonight, were you? In
I
terms
know.
of all of those different, all of those different things and all of the different. Do you know the amount of money that they either gave out or guaranteed? We're talking about 129 billion. The fact that they have managed to lose, or because of error, because of fraud, more than 10% of that, seems like there must have been some pretty significant problems with the way in which they dealt with it. I mean, even if you put a scheme in really quickly, more than 10% losses seems pretty significant. One of the things that I was looking at was the government's response to the report and the criticisms that was levelled at it. And despite the fact that the numbers about the fraud were actually in government documents, the Treasury spokesperson said, "We reject the claims made in this report." Now, the claims literally came from government documents. So I don't think the government knows what it's doing in relation to this. It certainly doesn't seem to be taking this as seriously as it should be. If if it was a government that cared about making a difference and getting this money back, it should be holding its hands up and saying, yeah, absolutely, we screwed up, we made some mistakes, and here we are, this is how we're going to fix it, rather than, nah, wasn't us, didn't do it.
Aye, aye. So not really serious enough. That's your view on that one. So let's see how much the groups and people in charge can get back from the businesses that are still in existence that haven't taken the money offshore. Right, our next story, back to home now. A strategy to combat serious organised crime has been strengthened following a number of notable successes which have greatly benefited Scotland's communities and businesses. The updated Serious Organised Crime Task Force strategy will see better collaboration across all sections, with an emphasis on identifying key threats, and ensures Scotland's response to those threats remains effective and continue to reduce the harm which organised crime causes communities. Organised crime is a serious threat, and Scottish society pays for it every day, either directly as victims or indirectly by paying for services such as the police, prosecution and health that are required to respond to it. Police Scotland and the National Crime Agency actively work with agencies in Scotland, the UK and internationally to tackle organised crime and to dismantle the groups responsible. This activity has delivered significant successes in recent times, particularly through the UK-wide Operation Venetic and the Scottish Operation Barricade, which has seen the removal of firearms and significant quantities of illegal drugs from our streets, along with a number of arrests. Cabinet Secretary for Justice Keith Brown said, "I want to see a Scotland where we all work together to reduce the harm caused by organised crime. Harm reduction will benefit our communities, businesses and every one of us." So it strikes me, Kirsty, this is obviously an issue which involves collaboration, doesn't it, across border and, as the report says, internationally. So is this the sort of thing, whether Scotland is part of the UK or whether it's an independent country, but this kind of collaboration always be necessary?
I think it will be, and I think it always should be important that we collaborate. And part of the positives about being an independent country is that we will be able to choose where to collaborate. We'll be able to have that positive relationship with our English neighbours and the agencies working in England. I've recently been announced as the SNP spokesperson for Wellbeing on behalf of the Westminster Group, and actually this is something that I see as a really positive step towards improving collective well-being. If you think about the amount of harm that is done by serious organised crime, the amount of harm that we see in our communities, the amount of pain and suffering that causes to families and individuals, actually if we can tackle that at the root, rather than tackling one guy with a firearm, you can tackle the entire box of firearms as it comes in. That makes a massive difference and reduces the risk to our communities, but also improves well-being, I think, in our communities. So this is incredibly positive. I'm really glad to see Keith Brown taking the lead on this and making sure that we move forward and it keeps going from strength to strength. One of the things that you need to remember about government strategies is that you can write a strategy and then completely ignore it. The good thing about this is that we're updating the Serious Organised Crime Task Force. It's a living document. The strategy is keeping moving on in order to ensure that we're tackling the issues of today rather than having a strategy that just tackles the issues of yesterday.
Yeah, excellent. I thoroughly endorse what you've said there, because various economic views on how to improve people's welfare usually include such issues as the effect of crime in communities. So it's definitely part of the wellbeing agenda. Okay, we better move on now, looking at the clock, late enough already. Now, our next story is back to money and abuse of tax revenues. New research led by the University of St Andrews, reveals that millions of lives around the world could be improved if we tackled global tax abuse. This new report, led by the Global Child Health team in the University School of Medicine, reveals that 36 million additional people would access basic sanitation, 18 million more could have access to clean drinking water, and almost 7 million more children would attend school if Western governments cracked down on tax abuse. In addition, over a decade, this extra revenue would be associated with preventing the deaths of 600,000 children and around 80,000 mothers across the globe. The Global Child Health team, working alongside colleagues from the Universities of Leicester and Warwick, have shown that if there were an increase in revenue equivalent to the losses from tax abuse, there would be significant progress towards the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs for the acronym of this story, right? The research published in Global Public Health this week quantified the potential for progress towards the development goals by modelling the impact of an increase in government revenue equivalent to the estimated tax abuses in each country. Government Revenue and Development Estimations Project is a project which is collaborating between Universities of St Andrews and Leicester, led by Dr Bernadette O'Hare, Senior Lecturer in Global Child Health, and Professor Stephen Hall, who is an applied econometrician. This project models the relationship between government revenue and progress towards the development goals. The model is used to quantify the potential of curtailing tax abuse, and has also been used to quantify the contribution of large corporations to public finances in different countries. The Tax Justice Network reports 4 countries, which are the UK plus its overseas territories and crown dependencies. Then secondly, Luxembourg, Netherlands and Switzerland as the countries which create the most vulnerabilities, and therefore they're responsible for more than half of the global tax abuses. Okay, so now I haven't read this report. It's very interesting, isn't it? This economic assessment of money lost has been carried out by the health departments in these universities. But so what they're saying is, supposing this 10 billion hadn't been filtered away through Seychelles, supposing that 10 billion had been put into public health, this is the amount of improvement we would get. So it's an interesting report. But are you surprised to find that Britain is responsible for, with others, for more than half of the disappearing money?
No, not surprised in the slightest. And actually, you know, what you were saying earlier about the Conservatives trying to say that they've done an awful lot to tackle dirty money. Well, this is the same. You know, this is the same issue. This is the fact that people are able to get away with it. And actually, if you think about it, the UK is very keen to roll back on its 0.7% commitment of international aid. If it continues down that path, then the very least it could do is to step up and to reduce or stamp out completely the amount of tax abuses in order. I mean, you're talking about 600,000 children surviving as a result of this funding. That is absolutely massive. And I think, you know, if the UK, I think the UK should continue to give lots of international aid and should continue to meet its international commitments. But if it isn't, then one of the things, as I say, the least it could do is to step up and take action on this.
Yes, so as they say in environmental policy, you know, before we spend money on doing good, let's first of all not waste money on doing harm. So it's one of those issues, you know, let's stop doing the abuse in the first place.
Spot on, I like that one a lot.
Yeah, I used to study in environmental policy. So let's move on. So the next story, Kirsty, is about what one of your colleagues, Drew Hendry, calls geographical energy price discrimination. So let's get to the story here and the detail of it. So in the House of Commons today, Drew Hendry, MP Drew, led a 10-minute bill calling for the UK government to end geographical energy price discrimination. Now, the energy pricing off gas grid households bill, introduced by Mr Henry, urges the Secretary of State and Ofgem to introduce new measures to prevent households from being burdened with additional costs for failing to live in an area with a mains gas supply. The current price cap, introduced by the UK government and Ofgem, is based on the assumption that household energy consumption is split 80-20 gas to electricity. However, 17% of households across the 4 nations of the UK currently live off gas. in other words, there's no gas in their area. That's what I meant, off-gas grid. As a result, off-grid homes are forced to pay 3 or 4 times more on their energy bills than the average household average across the 4 nations. The MP for Nairn, Badenoch and Strathspey wants to see the UK government deliver a clear timetable to stop this form of discrimination for once and for all. Drew Henry said, the UK government is failing thousands of families across all 4 nations, all because of the area they live in. As a result, through no fault of their own, off-grid homes are set to pay energy bills 3 or 4 times higher than the average household, despite using the same amount of energy. It is simply unacceptable. So Kirsty, the 10-minute bills, I think, are usually used to raise an issue. It's unlikely they're going to go anywhere unless the government backs it. But we're dealing with people here, well, basically in rural areas who are not going to have gas. So is that something that affects a lot of your constituents?
It doesn't affect a lot of my constituents because my constituency is almost wholly urban. But I used to live in Inch, which is outside Aberdeen to the west, and they closed the main road into Inch for a couple of weeks because they put in a new gas pipe. The new gas pipe didn't actually go to Inch. It just went past it. So it was really galling to have to go, miles round when they were putting in this gas pipe that wasn't going to go to it. So I've experienced living off gas grid. I know what it's like. And the fact that we've got this energy price cap that, is not sufficient even for people that are living in homes that are on gas grid. But people who are off gas grid, it's 3 to 4 times more on their energy bills. That is absolutely huge. I think, Ofgem needs to take cognizance of this. I think Drew's bill does need a snappier title, though. It could have had an acronym in there. Energy prices off gas grids pricing bill is a bit of a mouthful. So we could have had an acronym for it. But I think it's really important. I'm glad Drew raised this issue, and I'm genuinely surprised at the fact that it is 17% of the population. That is a massive number, and I was unaware of that. So he has raised awareness with me and hopefully with many other people.
Yes, I'm a Glasgow boy myself, yes. So we just discussed a couple of weeks ago, actually, with one of your colleagues, Alan Brown, that discussed the prospect of going hydrogen, and he pointed out to me something I should have thought of, that if you haven't got gas now, you can't have hydrogen next year either. It goes through the same pipe. So, yeah, there's got to be more than one solution to heating our homes. So I guess this means people must have, they must be all electric if they're not gas, I guess. So if only we had a way of generating electricity.
We had an oil tank in our garden, is how ours was heated. So it had oil-fired central heating. So there's a variety of different ways. Some people will have biomass. Some people will have, things that are more energy efficient. Yes, but some of them will be entirely electric.
Of course, oil, yeah, I remember back in the 60s and 70s, oil was cheap, of course. So since then, if you're dependent on oil, that's become very expensive also. So again, that's not a part of energy policy. So we will come back to that because, of course, we were discussing a couple of weeks ago the fact that Scotland produces an abundance of electricity, but is getting it to the homes through some sort of network. Okay, let's move on, Kirsty. Thanks for that. Now, France. Now we hear that it's quite likely that President Macron will be launching his re-election bid. He's not said yet. French media reporting that President Emmanuel Macron is set to launch his re-election bid soon, focusing on a handful of big policy ideas, with his first campaign rally likely to be held on the 5th of March. Mr. Macron will be entering the presidential race just a few weeks before the election's first round, which is on Sunday the 10th of April, and will hold a few large campaign rallies, probably 2 or 3, sources said. Everything is ready for the first 15 days following the announcement of his candidacy. A first campaign trip, then which meeting, which media, and which themes, that will be decided in the next few days, according to the government sources. Reports said that President Macron will focus on 3 or 4 major policy proposals. These will be on issues such as rebuilding France, a new social contract. The idea is not just to prolong his mandate, but to surprise, propose and shake things up. Other candidates have been campaigning for weeks already. Opinion polls suggest that Macron is the favourite to win the contest, in which multiple challengers on the right and left fragment the vote, although it's likely to be a much tighter race than when he won in 2017. Although he has not yet formally confirmed that he will run for a second mandate, Macron has strongly hinted he would, and has long been widely viewed as an open secret that he is going to run again. Macron is expected to take part in a campaign rally in Marseille, then another one in Paris, and possibly a third one in Western France. It's not yet certain on what day Macron will confirm that he is a candidate, but legally all candidates have to be registered before 6 p.m. on the 4th of March. So I guess, Kirsty, the most eye-catching feature of the French election so far has been the right wing and the question of which race this is going to stand to go for the right wing vote. Have you been following French politics a lot?
Not hugely, no, I'm not going to lie. But you know, when you're talking about the different policies that Macron is, potentially going to have, you're talking about COVID recovery, you're talking about a new social contract. One of the things that I'm sort of surprised that I think should be front and centre of what they're doing is talking about climate change, talking about the impact that France can have as a major European power on the, on the improvements that we need to make, the reductions that we need to make in carbon. So I would like to see that up there when he's doing these campaign rallies, and hopefully the people of France would also like to see that up there as a kind of key priority going forward.
So he's not said what these priorities are going to be. Of course, Macron was elected as a change candidate. He wasn't even in politics before, and his party was completely new. So I guess he wants to keep that kind of pot boiling with something exciting and new, but he hasn't yet revealed what that's going to be. But the other issue, of course, as we mentioned in the report, is that usually you get a large number of candidates in the French election. There's maybe a dozen. But of course, it's a two-round election, so this idea of fragmenting the vote, that's maybe not so important, is it? Because maybe 20 people could stand in the first round, but still there's only 2 left for the second round. So it's probably going to be a runoff between Macron and the right wing. I guess it looks like that. What I meant about the right wing earlier on is that, again, Le Pen is going to stand, but this time she has a rival on the far right. Have you come across this character, Eric Zemmour? He's apparently a television pundit and deeply racist, but so is she. So in that case, I guess you prefer Macron to the right wing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not necessarily hugely enamoured with all of the policies that France has put in place in recent years, but you're right, we're generally better not to have racists in charge of countries. I mean, if we can avoid that, all the better. I suppose if you end up in a situation where you've got the two candidates and people have to coalesce around one of the two candidates, it's not dissimilar to the situation where we have in Scotland, where people have to coalesce generally against around a pro-independence candidate or an anti-independence candidate, or they don't have to coalesce, but that's the way they've chosen to do it, which is why you've got the flexibility between people voting Labour and Tory to suit themselves if they're particularly unionist. But I hope that we end up in a situation where we don't have more European nations moving further right, because that would just be that would be the world is difficult enough right now,
Yes.
without having that piled on us as well.
Yes, I think it might be significant because a few years ago, particularly with Brexit and with the rise of right-wing parties in various countries, including Vox in Spain, won about 20 or 30 representatives, the right wing and the Farage Brexiteers seem to think that they were on the ascendant. So this might be an indication that that's past, that we've got over a peak racism is behind us. So let's hope so. Do you see any other sign of that? I mean, people in England, in fact, are now beginning to regret Brexit, aren't they?
Yeah, and actually, according to polling, we're seeing less people in England having immigration as one of the top concerns that they have. And actually, do you know what? If you're the Conservatives and you spent years and years telling people your life is rubbish because of immigration, we need to leave the EU so we can be in charge of immigration, you've got very few places to go now. So I'm very much hoping that actually the fact that they can no longer blame immigration for all of the ills will mean that people will begin to see that actually it's Tory policy that is causing the worst issues in our society, rather than anything negative that comes as a result of immigration, because immigration is overwhelmingly positive.
Yep, absolutely, yes. As we reported a couple of times on broadcast in Scotland, new Scots are usually young people and usually contribute or want to contribute if the Home Office would only let them. Okay, our next story, back home again now. Almost 4,500 people have signed up to learn how to save someone's life in the event of an opioid overdose. A nationwide awareness campaign launched last August encouraged the public to go to the Stop the Deaths website to learn how to recognise the signs of a drug overdose, receive training in the use of life-saving medication, naloxone, and also to get a free naloxone kit. The joint initiative by the Scottish Government and the Scottish Drugs Forum used TV and radio adverts, billboards at transport hubs and shopping centres to promote the message. While the campaign has finished now, people can still register their interest in receiving training and getting a naloxone kit. The campaign livery can also be found on Glasgow taxis, and more than 20 of the firm's drivers are among those who have volunteered to carry naloxone. Drugs Policy Minister Angela Constance said, "The response to this joint initiative with the Scottish Drugs Forum is really encouraging, and it emphasises how everyone can get involved in learning how to save a life." Now, this comes after we reported that, first of all, Scottish Fire and Rescue, and then secondly, Police Scotland have embarked on training in using naloxone to recognise if somebody's suffering from opioid abuse, overdose, and how to administer naloxone. So, do you think now, after some delay, is the Scottish Government finally tackling the drug death crisis more seriously?
I think we've always been tackling the drug death crisis incredibly seriously. It is something that's very, very important. This is specifically an issue that relates to overdoses, and I actually spoke to organisations in Aberdeen about this, Drugs Action, 3 years ago, I think, about the provision of naloxone in our communities and the fact that it's something that could be increased. But what we need to do in order to tackle the drug problems that we are facing and the drug deaths that we are seeing is much wider than just this. I'm so pleased that this has been successful, but this is one piece of the jigsaw. So we need to be making sure that we're continuing to push on things like the drug consumption rooms that we're hoping to have, on changes to the way that drugs policy works. And actually what we've done is we've tried to make the issue of drugs and the impact that they have a public health issue rather than a criminal justice issue, because it's something that people need help and support in order to get through, rather than being, massively criminalized and put into prison. That doesn't necessarily solve any of the problems that there are.
Yes, we've reported earlier that both Police Scotland and, in fact, the Scottish legal system as a whole is now very sympathetic to the idea of decriminalising, if you like. Well, but maybe that's going a bit too far, because Scotland, of course, doesn't have any power to decriminalise drugs. Do you think, is that maybe a way we should do, if we had the power to do that? Do you think Scotland should have a strategy similar to Portugal, for example, where I think a large amount of decriminalisation of particular drugs has gone through and is now law?
Personally, I'm hugely in favour of a system like the one in Portugal. I was going to bring up Portugal, actually, moving towards decriminalisation and moving towards tackling the harms that we have from drugs. People are in some cases scared to come forward and ask for help and assistance because they know that they will be criminalised as a result of asking for that help. And I don't think that's where we should be. And one of the things that the US states have discovered is that if you legalize some of these things, then you can get tax revenue from them, and rather than them being a cost to the taxpayer, they can be a bonus to tax revenues.
Yeah, I was watching a very funny series on Netflix a while ago called Weeds, which is about somebody who started dealing with a drug product made of weeds, and at the end of the series it becomes legal. So they start off being a bit dodgy and they end up running a chain of stores. So yeah, there's money to be made in it. Have you seen that one? It's very good.
I haven't seen it. I'm going to add that to my list.
Now, our second last story tonight, Kirsty, love in a time of conflict, and this is a research-based story again. Putting love at the heart of research could help shift our understanding of conflict and peace, according to new research co-led by the University of St Andrews. The research published in the International Studies Review explores the importance of love and care in rebuilding societies following conflict and violence, and asks what might happen if we look at conflict through a lens of life rather than death. The article was co-authored by Dr. Roxana Christilli, Lecturer of International Relations at St Andrews, and Dr. Philip Schultz, who's a postgraduate researcher in the University of Bremen. From her own research, Dr. Christilli noticed that studies into the effects of armed conflict, primarily focused on violence and suffering, motivating her to ask, how could we focus on love and care, and how could that expand our understanding of areas affected by conflict and draw attention to the way love and harm exist together in such places. As the authors wrote, scholarly narratives about armed conflict are typically concerned by a primary focus on violence, suffering, cruelty and harm. Yet in the midst and wake of violence, people also fall in love, for social and intimate relationships, and extend different forms of care to one another. The article is rooted in a decade of in-depth research from Colombia and Uganda, where the authors have listened to the stories of victims and survivors of violence, as well as former combatants, state officials, and those involved in building peace and restoring justice. Dr. Christilli's research at the university has explored various dimensions of feminist peace and conflict studies, most recently focusing on the politics and hierarchies of victimhood in Colombia, paying attention to how gendered power affects both experiences of violence and research into those. It is her hope that a care-based approach will shape research agendas and help to shift the perspective of those who are involved in peace building and justice in the wake of violence, impacting positively on peace talks, negotiations and spaces of justice, such as courts and human rights organisations, as well as informal spaces that victims and survivors create to support one another and make sense of their experiences. So when I was reading this report, Kirsty, I was thinking of things like the Peace and Reconciliation Commission at the end of the apartheid South Africa, when both sides said, we know that bad things have happened in the past, but that's not going to be the future. So do you see this as a good approach to saying, well, look at the problems we've looked at earlier on tonight. One day all the combatants have to sit down and talk together, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. And what we know that one of the best things that you can do in order to continue to have peace in an area that is a post-conflict zone is to support women, is to empower women and give them the opportunity to build back. And so I actually think this accords really nicely with that. If we look at, for example, in Northern Ireland, the amount of work that women did in supporting the peace process, we know that if you can bring love and care into that, if you can bring female voices in where, you know, in a lot of conflict situations you've pretty much only got male voices, if you can bring female voices in to that, then you're more likely to be able to build a lasting peace that will last and will ensure that people end up having the best life chances. So I'm actually going to go away and read this report because it sounds hugely interesting, and I think it is the right approach to take, particularly in post-conflict zones where we can go in and we can support and empower local people to make that positive difference with love and support.
Yes, one of the features, of course, of the politics of Ukraine and Russia is you very seldom see a woman, do you, on the television. In fact, the only woman I've seen recently in that, well, if you look at Belarus, of course, where another man is dominating the main opposition leader, Tanyuskaya, of course, is a woman who had to go to is it Latvia or Lithuania, where she's in refuge. But, you know, take the toys from the boys. Yeah, all of this stuff is big, tough men decide to show how strong they are. I remember also the guy, I was just to add to that, we were talking recently about Milorad Dodik, the Serbian leader in Republika Srpska. He just uses big manly talk all the time, says, I'm not a coward, they didn't elect me to be a coward, I'm a strong man, you know, so you just wouldn't get that so much rubbish, would you, if you had more women in power?
No, I mean we've got, you know, less to prove. We're not there to, you know, be massive and full of testosterone and ready to punch someone. You know, that's not something that is an imperative for female voices. So I think the more that we can do, and you know, it is the most important thing is that any peace that is created does last, and the more that we can do to support women and to ensure that we have that love in those areas is a positive thing. But yes, we could do with more female voices in politics across the board, I think.
Okay, so that's a report from University of St Andrews. into a different perspective on really moving away from violence. So that was our last story tonight, but we do have one other point to make. I said at the start of the programme, Kirsty, that we're actually simultaneously broadcasting 2 shows tonight because our outside broadcast team is down in another part of Glasgow and are taking part in the Remember Srebrenica exhibition. Now, in the Sogo Gallery, which is on the screen there, which is down at Salt Market in Glasgow, there is a photo exhibition, and it's about the Bosnian conflict, but also right now the ambassador from Bosnia is in Glasgow and is taking part in a panel discussion with 4 other speakers. And our team are recording that, and so that will be on our website. I think it's still happening right now. So we've had to split our resources tonight. That's one of the reasons why we were a wee bit late getting started. But we've got the full hour in anyway, Kirsty, so thanks for that. So that's on in Glasgow tonight, and you can find more details of that on our website, and you can follow us up later on the YouTube. And so just finally, 2 things to do. First of all, I have to thank Kirsty Blackman for waiting, and for that's the first time I've met you, so it was really good to have you on tonight. It was excellent to hear what you had to say on these topics. So thank you for joining us.
I very much enjoyed it.
And I certainly hope we can see you again. Thank you. So, and just finally, I've got to remind everyone that we receive no public funding at Broadcasting Scotland, but it is our aim. It's our mission, if you like, to be the independent broadcaster for Scotland, from Scotland, and I think we're going to be needed. I think independent broadcasting is going to be particularly important over the next year and a half. So we depend on you for funding. So please, if you look at the link below on broadcastingscotland.scot, if you would like to contribute at least £5 a month on a direct debit, then you can become one of our supporters, and any donations will be received. Of course, we've got really big bills to pay here now to keep the studio going. Obviously, we've got big electricity bills, the same as everyone else. So thank you for being a subscriber. I know a lot of you are watching now. And everybody, thank you for watching the programme tonight. So from me and from Kirsty Blackman, that's it. And it's Scotland Sunday back again tomorrow. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye now.